The United States Navy's F-18 training syllabus covers all aspects of flying and combat. The fighter weapons phase typically occurs at this training squadron's home field in Virginia or on a detachment to Key West. But some of this year's pilots are about to get an unheard-of opportunity, paired with a daunting challenge. 9 hours across the Atlantic Ocean to meet the most widely exported threat aircraft in the world, the MiG-29. But these MiGs are different. They are flown by an ally and provide real-world training against the actual threat. Not a computer, not a simulation, and not a Hornet pretending to be the Fulcrum, but a living, breathing, real MiG-29, flown by the best trained, most experienced, and toughest Fulcrum pilots on the planet, the German Luftwaffe's 73rd Fighter Wing. Red October is 2 weeks of training over the forests of the former East Germany, where the first jet aircraft was built. The Navy trains against the MiG-29 because it is the MiG-29 that they will most likely see in combat.
Shark 1 is dead, Shark 1 is dead. Time. Copy, Shark 1 is dead. Contact Scope 5, right contact ground.
For a squadron of U.S. Navy F-18 Hornet pilots, the war games are about to begin against a very real and threatening opponent, the Russian-built MiG-29 Fulcrum. For these peacetime pilots, the price of wisdom just went up. It's called Red October. Widely sold by the Soviet Union and then Russia, the Fulcrum is inexpensive. 2 aircraft can be had for the price of a single Hornet. Named for Mikoyan and Gurevich, the creators of the original Soviet jet fighters, over 1,400 MiGs have been built since 1984, with over half for export. U.S. pilots have seen combat with the Fulcrum over Libya, Iraq, and Yugoslavia. Flown by other nations such as Cuba, Syria, Iran, and North Korea, the Fulcrum represents the prime future airborne threat to American pilots. The chance to see it up close in the mock dogfights of Red October is unparalleled. In a simple comparison, plane versus plane, the Boeing-built Hornet comes out on top. But the advantage over the MiG is less clear when the jets come to the merge, an engagement's initial meeting where the aircraft pass 1,000 feet apart at speeds that can exceed 1,000 miles per hour. The formations and presentations of the battle may be preset, but the outcome is anything but certain. In the end, it is the quality and experience of the pilots that matters most. Dogfighting is like a knife fight. It is close combat, and nowhere in the world will you find a better MiG-29 pilot than here in Germany. They fight with an Eastern weapon, but have adapted Western tactics. They are trained to use independent, creative thinking and benefit from NATO support and maintenance, flying upwards of 150 hours a year. These German MiG pilots are the best trained, best equipped, and most dangerous opponents the F-18 pilots will ever face. Few American pilots have trained against the MiG-29, and even fewer have faced it in real combat. Its reputation as a deadly adversary is legendary, and for nearly all the pilots of Red October, this exercise is their first chance to see the Fulcrum up close.
Here we're standing in front of the MiG-29, the German version of the MiG-29. The German Air Force got these aircraft in 1990, right after unification. The East German forces had 24 of these jets, and the West German Air Force, of course, took over all of those aircraft. It was a very, very interesting aircraft. to German Air Force and to NATO in general, because it was the first Russian aircraft that had the maneuverability to counter the modern NATO jets, and it had a new radar, a pulse Doppler radar, that was capable of detecting low-flying aircraft.
When the MiG-29 first appeared, its radar was reputed to be equal, if not superior, to the Hornets. The Luftwaffe MiGs dispelled that rumor to the great relief of the West, but the Fulcrum proved to have a few tricks up its sleeve. Most fearsome for the Hornet pilots is the MiG's helmet-mounted sight, a retractable reticle with a heads-up display for the Archer infrared missile. The F-18 has nothing comparable. An American has to point the nose of the Hornet at the opponent to achieve missile lock. But in the MiG, the pilot merely turns his head. For the Americans, the Schlem radio call means the end.
Northern Hornet is dead. The Northern Hornet is dead. Copy, kill is too late.
If you take a closer look at the aircraft, we find the cannon, which is right here. It's a very big cannon. It's a 30mm cannon. And right in front of the aircraft, we can take a look at the ammunition. This would be the typical load of the gun. It's 150 rounds. When you compare it to the Hornet carries a couple hundred, but these rounds are a lot bigger. So if you need just one of these rounds to blow up a Hornet, while the Hornet would need several rounds to blow up a MiG-29. The gun is still a very valuable weapon in the dogfighting today. It's the only weapon that you cannot jam or decoy with other decoys.
While the Hornet may have superior slow-speed maneuverability, the Americans are dazzled by the Fulcrum pilot's final surprise.
In the very back of the aircraft we have two very powerful engines, and a very important aspect in dogfighting is to have a lot of thrust. It is best to have more thrust than the aircraft weighs, so we're talking about a thrust to weight ratio bigger than 1, which would theoretically allow the aircraft to climb straight up, like you've probably seen before. And this helps us to keep up the speed when we're flying tight turns, fighting for example a Hornet, and that way we have a very, very slight advantage over most of our opponents. Being a fighter, the aircraft of course needs something to shoot. We not only just want to fly around, our task is to shoot down other aircraft. And therefore we have not only the gun but also missiles. And here we have an older infrared version. It has an infrared seeker head which is looking for heat sources, mainly for the engine exhaust, which is normally very high temperature. So this seeker head will lock onto the exhaust of the target aircraft and then steer itself toward the aircraft. It's a so-called fire and forget missile. The second missile we have is the so-called Archer. It's also an infrared missile. It's a fire and forget missile also, so it will lock onto the heat source of the enemy target, of the enemy aircraft. And this is the missile that makes the MiG-29 so dangerous in close-in dogfights. Whenever we get close with other fighters, we have a big advantage due to this missile, because the seeker head can look very far to the sides and lock up targets where other missiles would not be able to do this.
The MiG-29 also carries a radar missile. It tracks targets similarly to the Hornet's AMRAAM, but with far less range.
Out at range we had a very big disadvantage and have to think of crazy tactics to get close to the Hornets and then use our superiority with the short-range weapons we have and the maneuverability.
In contrast to the physically demanding MiG, the F-18 is flown on stem power, as in brainstem. It means being able to pilot the Hornet the same way they're able to breathe or walk, without having to think about it. They have the advantage of technology, fly-by-wire controls, and the glass cockpit, where computer-driven displays have replaced dozens of steam gauges.
You may hear that the issue of speed in a fighter jet is incredibly important in order to get somewhere, and that is true. But the best thing about the Hornet is its slow speed handling characteristics. It's very forgiving, it's very dynamic, you can get slower, faster than any other airplane. What that allows me to do though is to point my nose at the bad guy and take him out with a missile or a gun.
The intentionally unstable design of the modern fighter jet allows the superb performance and maneuverability of the Hornet. Computerized flight controls keep the jet in the air, but they aren't lightning-fast supercomputers. They are comparable to early 1980s era desktops, albeit ones that can withstand 7.5 G turns, hundreds of carrier landings, and still never freeze up.
Back here, probably one of the keys to the Hornet performance besides the leading edge and trailing edge flaps is the stab. It's an all-moving stabilator, differential as well, helps with roll control and pitch authority. The F-18 Hornet has probably the best pitch rate of any aircraft out there. So much so that you could almost gray yourself out or black out under the commanded G-forces if you're at a high enough airspeed.
A classic dogfight requires a close-range weapon, the 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon. But beyond visual range, the Hornet, with its advanced radar capability, is superior to the MiG. An AMRAAM can be launched at an opponent many miles away, well before either pilot could make a visual identification.
We've got 9 stations on the aircraft, 2 on the wing, 1 on the center line, 2 on each cheek, and then the wingtip stations. These gentlemen and lady are about to download an AIM-9 CATM, a captive air training missile from Aircraft Station 9.
In Red October, the AIM-9s won't be real. The computer will simulate these short-range Sidewinder's capabilities when the pilot pulls the trigger and calls Fox 2 on the radio.
Besides actually carrying weapons, probably the most important station on a Hornet is the left cheek station. Left cheek station, while we're in combat, about 99% of the time carries a FLIR pod. That FLIR pod is paramount for getting battle damage assessment, for lasing for targets, acquiring targets, responding to tasking, and it is not loaded on our RAG jets, but every fleet bird that goes out on deployment will have one of those, and that is our bread and butter. So taking off from the carrier, landing on the carrier makes you a cool Navy pilot. Having your FLIR allows you to get the BHA to actually employ, as we're told to do, and allow you to use those smart weapons.
While executing the basic fighter maneuvers called BFMs, the pilots communicate with each other and the ground controllers by radio, using words such as crank, notch, flow, and flank. Top secret codes for specific offensive and defensive maneuvers.
Pitbull ×2, kudos notch right, reference 150. Copy, Kuda 22 is engaged, left hand turn, offensive with an F4. Copy, visual, I'm at your right 3, a little high. Visual. Copy, 22 is low.
Just as few pilots have ever flown with a MiG, few civilians have ever heard these tactical calls. Red October affords many prized opportunities.
Shark 2, wind 2 degrees at 9 knots. You're clear to land runway 28 in sequence. Code lane right side and if possible expedite vacating traffic behind.
On this flight, Lieutenant Dave Koss, call sign Mongo, an instructor pilot with VFA 106.
I waited my whole life to do that, and I'm a little sad it's over. I'm always studying the capabilities of the airplane, and I got to see it, and it was eye-watering. It was amazing.
Who won?
1 for 1. He got the first one, I got the second one. So, at least I learned something.
The Germans know their special place in the fighter pilot world and love the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities.
Today we were going to fly one F-18 together with me, plus 2 additional F-4s, and we're going to fly against 2 other F-18s with varying scenarios, and they have put a few handcuffs to what we are doing, but it's going to be an all-altitude and full-up war, basically.
The restrictions placed on the engagements are a necessary evil, but sometimes without warning, the Fulcrum pilots deviate from the plan and change tactics to fool the students. The Germans are proud. They are the best aggressor pilots in the West, and they want to show what they can do.
One of you is dead.
The next mission, a 2v4. Two Hornets are headed for an engagement with 4 adversary aircraft.
Got this
As the instructor, Mongo flies wing. The lead pilot is a Category 3 student, Lieutenant Commander Tim Carr, call sign Cowboy. Their challenge? Track and kill multiple targets at long range.
Cuda 2-1, fly ready for takeoff.
Roger, Cuda 2-1, wind is 230 degrees at 8 knots, you're cleared for takeoff, report leaving.
2-1, Mongo.
Unlike a 1v1 dogfight, today the engagement with the enemy will begin at long distance, beyond visual range.
Clear, switching.
The view we have right now is the same formation. If you can imagine, we're flying this way right now and the camera's right in front of us pointing back at us. So we're looking at both of us from me more of a head-on view, him from kind of the side. And when I'm flying in formation, you can see my aircraft back in there. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
22,000 maneuvering. Southern group code.
Lights on.
That's the standard call. We've told everybody we're set up where we are. The bandits have called set in the south. To get our tapes on call so that we're recording our radar picture and HUD picture and call the fights on.
Cuda flight, fights on.
And start heading at them.
Picture, 2 groups, azimuth 5. Western group, bullets, 175, 13, 17,000, flanking northeast.
2-1.
We just came in with 2 F-4s. They came in an altitude split, so I'm going to split off and go for the high one. And shortly thereafter, we're going to pick up the low one. That tone you hear is me getting a lock on this guy, and I just killed one of the F-4s, and Cowboy will take care of the other F-4.
Mark 3, kill, Phantom, left in, turn low.
Copy, clear.
Now we're just, you can see us looking around, making sure we're not going to hit anybody, because there's been 4 airplanes in really close proximity doing a lot of turning here for a couple of seconds.
And let's terminate this.
Confirm terminate.
Cuda 2-1 terminating.
2-2 terminating. Mantola copy, terminate.
For 2 weeks, Red October has taken the Hornet pilots through a training regimen of simulated air combat, giving them first-hand experience against the MiG-29. They've been challenged to evade its weapons, forced to confront its vertical thrust maneuver, dared to defeat it in both long-range and close combat.
We did what we set out to do. We validated our tactics, and I'm comfortable knowing that if I launch off the ship in this jet, I can take it up against the best the enemy's got to throw at us.
In between flights, the pilots swap their war game stories with a mix of adrenaline and relief. They reenact their successes and their failures.
And he comes down and he starts popping stuff up.
All right. Live and learn.
So I got my work cut out for me. Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
The exchanges may be part bravado, but there is no mistaking something new in their eyes. A clear look of self-awareness.
I'm freeing him. And I'm getting under him. All of a sudden he just goes. And he goes. And he settles into the deck. Yeah.
the German pilots, this exercise may be over, but their role continues. They alone can provide this type of realistic adversary training. They are sharing their wisdom. By flying in Red October, the American pilots have passed a critical entrance exam for survival, should they ever have to face a MiG-29 when the air combat is real.